I'm going to go over some tips for sewing on corsets. First of all, think about your fabric. If you're using a cotton or couture, you might want to pre-wash it and pre-shrink it. Also consider whether you might want to fuse it for extra strength. And if you do, be sure to test it first and make sure you like the way it's going to react. Test your joining stitches and always press your seams open. We want the corset to lie as flat along the body as we possibly can. Clip, unless you feel like you need to do a fitting and that you want to hold off on the clipping, but clip where it's really curved to make it lay flat. Next is the boning. This is a really important aspect of it. And the easiest way to do the boning is to simply sew the seam allowances together, as I've done here. So here's a foundation that has no top stitching on it. This will go on the inside of the garment. And so what I've done is I've simply sewn the seam allowances together and then slipped the boning inside that little channel. The other way it could be done would be to take your two seams and sew them together and then push the boning through the casing that makes. And in this case, you have a stitch on the outside. Here is some boning that comes pre-made with the cotton casing. So what you do is you would remove the boning from the casing, stitch the casing onto the corset, and then slide the boning back in. That's the way this one is done. This is a corset that's ready for a fitting. So it has minimal stitching on the outside. You can see some stitch lines here. So what's been done is that the corset pieces have been joined, and then this cotton casing has been sewn not on the seam allowance, but in the middle of the sections, and then the boning inserted. Now the advantage to this is in creating bulk. If I fold those seam allowances together and then top stitch, it's going to create a pretty thick seam. But here, because I've put the boning in along the corset, and the stitch lines don't really matter because this is an evening wear foundation, so I don't really care about the stitches showing, then I can put the boning wherever I want. Now, another way of sewing in boning is to make your own casing. So with this, this plastic feather boning, I've created a little silk charmeuse channel that the boning can slide into. And so what I can do is simply sew this little piece anywhere I want on the inside of the corset or foundation. I can sew it to a seam or in the middle, and then just slide my boning in, and then it won't show, and it'll be minimal bulk of that attaching. Now here's another thing you can do, which is take a ribbon. This is a nice grosgrain ribbon, and because this spiral boning is a little heavier, I'm going to use this as the casing, and in that case I will stitch twice, one on each edge of the ribbon, and then make that casing for the boning. This is what you see here. So this is pretty standard positioning for boning. I've got two in the center front, and I've stitched two pieces of rayon hem tape here to use for my casings. I've avoided putting boning over the bust because sometimes it gives kind of an artificial look to the bust curve. I've done this curve here, which is important to keep the strength here, and one in the back. So that's a pretty standard way to do your boning. Okay, let's move on now to the closures. So first of all, the busk. So this is a very standard closure, but it's a little complicated to apply. Let me just show you here how this has been done. So here's the hook part of the busk, and here's the little posts, right? And so this hooks like this, boom, fits inside. So what I've done for the hook part is, here's the busk here, and it looks like this, and then I've created a facing piece and left a little opening where that round piece can just slide through. The other way to do it is by making buttonholes. So there you can see there's a little opening there in the facing piece that just slides through. And yes, buttonholes are another way that can be done. And then you just pull it tight and stitch with the zipper foot down there to hold that in place. On the post side, this is a little simpler because what I've done here is simply punch a hole with an awl. Now, if you're worried about the fabric raveling, you could always fuse it a little bit. But if you awl it and just move those threads around, those little posts should just pop through without breaking the threads, right? And then you just, again, stitch down the outside. So another closure would be a zipper, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. You might want to do just some nice top stitches to show the zipper if you like, as an exposed zipper. The hook and eye tape is a little trickier. I don't know if you can see through this, but you can see the little metal pieces there. So you have to literally sew on the hook part. You have to literally sew in and out of those little hook things, or sew it by hand. So that's a little trickier. Also, I wanted to talk about the lacings and how we might work with that. So here's an example of some little eyelets that have been put in, and I always like to use boning as a support on those lace ups, because if I don't have the boning, the eyelet, the grommets will collapse as you lace them up. So it's really nice to have that boning there as a security so that it doesn't collapse when you do that. So that little boning channel is sewn right there on the inside of that. Here's another example of this piece that I did with using the sticks for boning. And so what I did was I put a couple pieces of leather in back of it and stitched them down, and then I put the sticks right here, right at the center front, so that it's not going to collapse inward. It's going to hold that lacing nice and firm. On this lacing, I wanted to show you how easy this is to do these eyelets, these little mini eyelets, the way these look. They're very easy to do with just a tool that you can buy at a fabric store. Just crimp them right in. And then these bigger grommets are two-piece. They have a top piece and a bottom piece. And I have a little home toolkit that I bought where you simply pound this in and make the hole. You put the grommet here, you put the thing here, boom, and you pound it in, and it makes a really nice hole for those grommets. Also, of course, there's kick presses and contractors where you can send them out to have these grommets attached. But sometimes it's fun to have your own tools at home in case you're doing a sample or doing a one-off thing where you need to do something right away. So the last thing I wanted to discuss was the subject of underwires. So when you're creating your corset or bustier, a decision has to be made whether you're going to make it strong enough so that the person does have to can go without a bra, or whether the person is going to be wearing a bra, a strapless bra under it, or whether they're going to be wearing no bra. So to have a really supportive structure, you really need the underwires to sit under the bust and offer that support. Now here, this is a basic princess line corset, and what I've done is I've molded the Petersham to create kind of a stay area in place of the underwire. Now because this is bias here in this direction, this Petersham ribbon creates kind of a mock underwire and holds that fabric there from stretching out. So it does offer a little more support without using the formal underwires. This is one that does have the underwire, and so you can see how it's offering some support and shape right there. And here's your waist stay here. So the distance between the waist stay and the underbust is really important to get the right fit. And underwires are very tricky. It's very hard to get just the right curve here. And I will show you a close-up of that in a still, but just so you can see what's happened here. This is a little bias casing where you slide the underwire in. And then here's been a little bit of stitching and padding done there to help also with support. So hopefully this will be helpful, some tips for sewing. There's many different ways to do corsets, and of course you can experiment yourself and come up with your own new ways of sewing.